The Compact Presario S6010NX, equipped with a 2.7 GHz Intel Celeron processor and 256 megabytes of RAM. With onboard graphics and sound, it's the pinnacle of computing power. Actually, not so much. Not being one to ever turn down a free bit of gear, I inherited this computer from a friend a few years ago. Since then, I've used it for a few things. I installed Windows XP Professional, installed Flash 2004, did some animation, some other lightweight stuff, just mostly played around. And now I've got some new plans for this old compact. I intend to bring it to its maximum potential, upgrading it in every way I possibly can, to use as a VST host in my music setup. I'll be running lots of cool mid-2000s music software. We'll touch on what exactly in future installments, but for now, let's focus on the upgrades. How are we going to bring this computer to life and make it useful in a modern music setting? First up, we'll be using an SD to IDE adapter so I can utilize an SD card as the main hard drive. I've never used one of these before, so I'm curious how it will work. I got a 32GB SDHC card to pop in the adapter, 2 new 1GB sticks of ATEC DDR RAM, a Pentium 4 processor running at 2.8 GHz with quadruple the L2 catch of the original Celeron, and a 400 MHz FSB speed, the maximum supported by the motherboard. And since I'm running out of desk space, I've decided to try out this cheap RE i8 wireless keyboard and touchpad combo. And for some external storage, I'll be using 2 of these tiny 32GB SanDisk Cruiser Fit USB flash drives, bringing us to 96 GB total storage. Let's get to taking out the old components. First, I'll remove this old network PCI card. We won't be needing that, but I'll toss it in the parts bin for future usage, just in case. And we'll disconnect power and ribbon cables from all the drives. I'll pop out the 256 megabyte stick of RAM, and a 512 megabyte stick that honestly I didn't even know was in here. Then I'll remove the heatsink, pull out the Celeron processor, wipe off the old thermal grease, and expose it to sunlight for the first time in who knows how long. Now, at this point you may be wondering, yo, seqfreq, this is a music computer, what about the sound card? Well, for that, I've opted to go with the creative Soundblaster Live. And I've got something special in mind for this. You see, I loathe dongles, and the idea of using the game port breakout cable for MIDI I/O drives me insane. I'd rather have a much more permanent solution. So I plan to utilize the pins of the game port connector on the underside of the sound card to attach a new daughter board, which contains all of the circuitry which is normally found in the MIDI breakout cable. Utilizing the schematics, I've drawn up a strip board layout which will house all the components for the MIDI input and output circuitry. First, we need to cut the strip board down to size. Now we need to drill some holes for the standoffs. And now, a test fit. That should work out nicely. Alright, it's time to start assembling the board. First, I'll mount my jumpers. And solder them in place. Now I'll mark on the underside of the board where the traces need to be cut. I'll begin placing my components, First, the passive components, resistors, capacitors. Now the active circuitry, a couple transistors, and an IC. That's looking pretty good. Time to solder the leads. Now I'm soldering the MIDI in and out connectors. And I'll attach it to the board and solder in place the 5 jumpers leading from the daughter board to the sound card. And there you have it, Soundblaster Live with a panel mount MIDI I/O, a much more permanent solution for a MIDI interface. Now I'll go ahead and remove the old drives. First, an 80GB Mac Store hard drive. Now a Mitsumi 3.5-inch 1.4MB floppy disk drive. And finally, the Asus CDRW drive. Okay, so the computer has been stripped of all its old components. Now it's time to install our upgrades. First, we'll pop in our fancy new sound card. Next, I'll install the SD to IDE adapter with its 32GB SD card. 2 fresh ATEC 1GB sticks of RAM, bringing us to 2GB total, the maximum supported by the motherboard. Now the processor. Some fresh thermal grease. I'll reattach the heatsink. And we're good to go. Before I install Windows, I'm going to unbox this Re i8 wireless keyboard touchpad combo, and we'll see how that feels. Pop the box open and slide it out. Man, this looks a lot smaller in person. The keys have a really nice clicky feel. It's made of a really nice soft touch plastic. I'll pop open the back compartment where you see we have our wireless receiver and our lithium-ion battery. Man, that's really stuck in there. Okay, let's close that up and see what else we have in the box. Oh look, it even came with the charge. We've got a useless piece of paper and a curious looking USB cable. Now this is a Y cable with a female USB plug on one end. I assume this is so you can have the receiver plugged in and be charging the keyboard while only using up one USB port on the computer. That's pretty handy. Alright, it's time to install Windows. I'll be using a genuine copy of Windows XP Professional Service Pack 3. You can see I got a bit ahead of myself and pulled that CD-ROM drive out a little too early, so I put it back in so we'll be able to boot from the disk. And I'll wait for the CD to boot. And we're greeted by the lovely blue shade of the Windows setup. To avoid boring you to death, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Alright, so all of the necessary drivers have been installed. I've disabled all the Windows components I won't be needing to make this as lightweight as possible. This is a real-world boot test, and you can see that it clocks in at about 28 seconds. That is by far the quickest Windows XP machine I have ever used. Now, using the i8 wireless keyboard, I'll go ahead and open some software for just a quick demonstration. Everything seems to be working great so far, and I'm pleasantly surprised. So that'll just about do it for this first video, but please stay tuned for more in the future, where I'm going to be demonstrating the actual uses for this. I'll be using it as a MIDI slave to my Atari ST, using it as a standalone DAW, and as a processor for affecting live audio. If everything turns out well, I'm going to fabricate a new rack mount steel chassis for this, so it will integrate nicely with my current music rack. Thanks for watching. seqfreq out.